Mode. We have a few people rolling in. We are going to wait until the hour. Thanks for coming in. While you're joining us, feel free to introduce yourself. We have a prompt on this first screen here, so share your title, pronouns, and where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear from you. Hi, everyone. We're going to start in a few minutes, just waiting for the top of the hour and a few more folks to join. Maybe people are grabbing some water or some lunch before they jump on the webinar. We know your time is very valuable. We're all very busy. But thanks so much for joining. And while you're coming in, please introduce yourself in the chat. We have a prompt on the first screen here. Please share your title, your pronouns, and where you're joining from. We'd love to hear from you.
Joanna, it looks like chat is disabled. Can we enable the chat?
Yep. Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry about that. Should be open to everyone now. Welcome, welcome. Great. Looks like our participants are still coming in, but we can get going. We have a lot of great information to share with you all today. As you are coming in, please feel free to introduce yourself in our chat. We have a prompt on the first screen here. Please share your title, your pronouns, and where you're joining us from. I just want to thank you all and welcome you to our webinar on elevating ourselves, ensuring impact and equity in CEO and ED evaluations. As you're coming into our space today, please introduce yourself. We have a prompt on that first screen. My name's Joanna. My pronouns are she, her. I'm on the marketing team here at Edgility, and I will be your webinar support today. So just do a little technical information before we get going. There will be plenty of time for participation, but throughout the webinar, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer during the webinar. And if we don't get to the question during the webinar, we will definitely answer it at the end of the webinar. At other points of the webinar, we will ask you to add comments to the chat. There'll be different questions and different times for you to participate. We will be recording this and send out the recording with additional documents in an email within this week, just that you have it all and you have the information at your fingertips. I'm going to hand things over to our host, Edgility co-founder and managing partner, Christina, and senior consultant, Brett. Take it away.
Thanks, Joanna. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, good. So nice to see everyone today. Brett and I want to introduce ourselves. I'm Christina Greenberg. I'm one of the co-founders of Edgility. I'm also a managing partner, and I lead our search practice, as well as lead this evaluation work and succession planning work that we do for our clients. I've spent about 20 years in the recruiting space and talent space. Started out actually recruiting teachers for schools and then principals, and then transitioned about 14 years ago into doing more broad nonprofit work. Recruiting, search, talent supports, other kinds of talent work. I also was a board member for about 11 years of different nonprofit organizations. And often because of my background, I ended up leading our evaluation process. And so I've sat in the seat of many of you that are board members and trying to figure out how we can do this the best way possible and ensure that one of our core jobs, which is hiring, managing, and supporting our CEOs and executive directors, is done appropriately. I'm in Oakland, California, and I'm excited to talk with all of you today. Brett, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Christina. Hi, everyone. My name is Brett Kunsch. I'm a senior consultant here at Edgility. I've been here about 2.5 years. Prior, I was with New York City Public Schools. I was with the Human Capital Office, similar to you, Christina, recruiting teachers, went through the whole effort of pre-K for all, staffing both public schools and community-based organizations. Ended my time there in the Office of School Wellness Programs, running implementation of all PE health education before and after school programming in all of Brooklyn. So excited to be here today, excited to talk through evaluation, the nuts and bolts of it, and really to respond to your questions. So certainly as you have them, please put them in the chat.
Great. I wanted to first just do a quick intro on Edgility and who we are in case you don't know us very well, and then we'll transition into the content of our webinar quite quickly afterwards. So who we are. So Edgility, hopefully you all know, but you may not know, we're a talent consulting firm. We work across all different areas of talent. Our real why is the idea that if we have the right leaders in place and the right talent systems, then we can really achieve equity, not only for our organizations, but for all those that we're supporting. Our organizations that we work with are nonprofits and social mission-driven companies. And so all of us are trying to do that mission-driven work. And we feel like if we can place equity-minded leaders and ensure that the systems they're working in are also functioning properly and supporting all of their people, then we can measure our impact over time and make consistent improvements through that work that we do. Then we can do the really important stuff, right, which is closing wage gaps and opportunity gaps and building a true leadership bench that's reflective of the communities that we're all working to serve and just reflective of the diverse range of folks that we have out in our society today. And so that's really why we exist at Edgility.
And in terms of what we do, we really across the talent spectrum, do a number of things. So placing exceptional leaders, we do that through executive search. We do that through recruitment campaigns, transition support. We close wage gaps. We do compensation program design, wage gap analysis, how to implement that right across the organization. And really the last piece here is what we're going to talk about today, redesigning talent systems. So talent philosophy development, performance management, either redesign or design proper, and then the CEO and executive director evaluations, which is a fairly new line of service. And we're really excited to talk about it with you. We serve a broad range of clients. We work nationally, even internationally on our talent equity consulting side. These are just a sampling of some of the clients we've had the pleasure of working with, again, across the country. Many of these names, you'll recognize.
Muted. Zoom newbie. I'm not a Zoom newbie, but I'm acting like one. So what we're going to focus on today, we're going to talk about principles of evaluation just generally. What is evaluation? Why should we do it? We're going to talk about how we have thought about it at Edgility. So the frameworks that we found most helpful as we've been working with clients and internally on evaluation. We're going to give a mini case study of an example of when we put it into action, just to give you some ideas of what you might do in your organizations. And then we'll definitely leave time for Q&A at the end. For any questions you have for us, you can either put in the chat or you can voice them aloud. So I think we're ready. And then our real hope is that we're providing not only information that's interesting to you, but maybe some real strategies and concrete things you can take with you. The final thing I'll say, and we'll send this as a take home when we're done, is we have developed a tool on our website, a free tool that you can access to start to think about evaluation and how you might present findings and think about findings for your executive director or CEO, if you're in the seat of evaluating someone, or for someone that you're working with who is the ED or CEO. So we'll be sending that out as a take home. It's also available on our website too. Challenges. So what are some of the things that we've found? Brett and I, working in the talent space as people that support leaders and support organizations, have seen, right, over the years, and part of the reason why we wanted to start to think about working in this space, we've seen that there can be a lot of challenges in evaluation. As I mentioned a moment ago, one of the most important things that nonprofit boards do, and as well as school boards or any other board that's managing a leader, is to hire, to support, to evaluate, and to grow those leaders, right? And folks hire leaders often, and they understand their role is to hire or fire them as appropriate, but the evaluation piece sometimes gets lost. And so what we tend to find is there's sort of two big places where we've found it's really important for evaluations to be done, and also just mismatched spots that a lot of organizations face. The first is there can be disagreement about performance levels. So for example, we can have cases where folks we'll place a leader, let's say, we'll place them knowing here are their strengths, here are their growth areas. The board says, great, they hire them. A couple years later, the board might come to us or come to each other and say, hold on, this person isn't performing very well, or they're not doing all the things in their job we thought they should do. And the leader then's coming from the other side and saying, I think I'm doing a great job. I'm not really sure why my board isn't more supportive of me or giving me better feedback. And in that case, often they don't have aligned metrics, right? So they may not have a dashboard, a suite of things that we're looking at on a regular basis to say, is our organization healthy and are we on the right track? The leader might have one set of metrics, the board might have another, and they're not talking with one another and aligning those and ensuring that they're consistent. So that can lead to misalignment of expectations and also just miscommunications, right? Because the leader says, I think I'm doing this great thing, and the board doesn't agree. And so one of the things a really good evaluation process can do is to level set. What are the expectations for this person, for the organization they're leading, and for them themselves, to really help clarify what we're all striving towards? And then the second place is sometimes there's just no evaluation process at all. So you might be surprised, but we often come in and we'll say, great, how's this person doing? And they say, I don't know, I think they're doing well. And the leader will say, a lot of cases, actually, leaders have come to me saying, Christina, I want an evaluation process. I want to know how I'm doing. I want feedback. I want to understand how I can do better. I want to understand actually 360, like how different people in the organization feel about me and my performance. And so those are two places where we feel like it's most important, both to have an evaluation, but also that we can be helpful. And we have tried to be helpful before in designing a framework for it.
So I think a lot of us, right, we intuitively know evaluations matter, feedback matters, right? But we just wanted to give, 3 kind of data points here to really share and ground us in the data as to real specifically, dollars and cents, right? Why it matters. So we see 30% performance improvement for CEOs who receive feedback from performance evaluations. That's a pretty big jump in performance. 92% of CEOs, senior executives, believe that they're receiving feedback in a 360-degree way, really are just effective for their development as leaders. And then $4.50, right? That's the average return per dollar invested for companies that fund a comprehensive leadership development program for their staff. So certainly a worthy investment. Something that everyone can agree upon is worthwhile and certainly does have a meaningful impact. So really just to ground us in some of the principles of effective evaluations. Transparency and communication, critical, right? It's really it's unfair, right, for a CEO or executive director to not know when the evaluation is going to take place, who's going to be involved, right, the rollout, making sure that everyone involved receives, proper communication. Another piece, which I'll touch on later, is, the difference between feedback and evaluation, right? Only the board and the CEO through their own self-assessment can provide a proper evaluation. When we think about 360 feedback, that's feedback, right? That's providing input on the impact of a CEO's, actions and their results. So collaboration with stakeholders, this is co-created, right? We have to make sure that it's co-created, that there's kind of to the first point, transparency and communication around like what's going into the evaluation process, what are we specifically looking at, that is data-driven and objective. For us, I think our value add at Edgility is we are third party, right? We are not in the thick of the organization, the day-to-day. We can look at things, in a very straightforward way, look at the data, both quantitative and qualitative, and provide that objective view of how the CEO is performing against a set of metrics and competencies. Context matters very much so. Like there's going to be, each year is going to be different for a CEO and for any organization. We can all attest to that since COVID-19, right? Every year is very different. Context does matter. It is really important to include that in the evaluation. If you're short-staffed, if there is budget shortfall, like there's all sorts of things that are important to really note and get on the same page about. And the next steps are critically important, right? The worst thing that could happen is an evaluation takes place and then there's no follow-up. There's no further conversation. There's nothing coming out of it that's going to be, really forward-focused.
Thanks, Brett. So when we sort of are putting our heads together around some of the things that in mission-driven organizations are markers of success or should be markers of success that you should be thinking about as you're designing your evaluation process, here's some things that came to mind. The first, not surprisingly, is mission alignment and impact, right? Your leader has to be aligning the activities that they're doing and the organization is doing with your mission and working to fulfill that mission, right? And so for this, you really could look at metrics around who you're serving and how communities impacted, any changes that have been achieved, and or just are they embodying the mission day in, day out? In some of our evaluation processes, we've actually asked that question of the leader, of the board members, and of staff. How well is this person embodying the core values of the organization and the mission of the organization and furthering it as they go? Financial sustainability, of course, is really important. None of us can keep our doors open, right? If we don't have the dollars and cents to pay our teams and do the programs and services that we want to provide. And so looking at the financial health and sustainability under the leadership of that CEO or executive director will obviously be critical. You can look at revenue growth, fundraising effectiveness, expense management, and even just have some folks even have their own goals around, we want to do some earned revenue, or we want to get funding from these particular sources. So personalize it to yourselves, but think about, obviously, finances is a key bucket. Stakeholder engagement, right? You want your donors, your volunteers, clients, parents, students, community members, whoever you're working with, you want them to feel really tied to the organization and cared for, and a part of what you're doing. And so you could look at, sometimes folks do culture and climate surveys for different folks that are engaged with the organization, retention rates of folks working with you, community outreach efforts, how many people came to your event, how many folks are interacting with you online or showing up for programs and services every day. And then in line with the program pieces, how effective are your programs? Are they innovative? Are they being implemented with fidelity to your model? What are your outcomes? Are you adapting to changing needs? So those are all things you can take account of for in the program bucket. And then of course, culture and performance is key, right? We want to make sure that we have staff retention, employee satisfaction, that we're looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, and how that's actually working on the ground, not just as words, but what's really happening. What are the experiences of different folks in the organization? We have our town equity assessment that we do at Edgility that we both administer internally, but also use externally with our team, with our clients, I mean, and that looks at sort of not only overall how people are feeling, but let's break it down by demographic group. Let's break it down by different kind of person identity-wise, and are they all having a common experience? Strategic leadership and vision, obviously that's key, right? You have to fulfill the strategies that you're working to meet. And so is that person providing vision and direction? Have they created a strategic plan? Are they implementing it? Look at your goals, right? Every year, look at the challenges and opportunities that they've faced and surmounted, hopefully, through their work. And then finally, partnerships and collaborations. So depending on your model and what you're doing, most organizations have some aspect of partnerships and collaboration, whether those are driving towards revenue or driving towards program outcomes or just driving towards communication in the broader sector. And so look at the quality of partnerships, your initiatives that have launched, and any shared outcomes that have been achieved. These are some of the things that we named, but I'm curious for folks to either put in the chat or speak aloud. Are there any unique criteria that either weren't on my list or things that they're on the list that you want to double click on that you think are particularly important for success in your organization? So I'll give everyone a moment. Again, you can put it in the chat or you can speak aloud if you'd like, whatever you prefer. Staff development, retention, yeah, for sure. It's a huge one. Oh, I love the radical empathy, Ganita. That's really interesting. Yeah. Right. Knowledge of the space you're in. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And that knowledge, I think, I didn't double click on that, but I think that is really important. The context to situating where you are. And some people even also highlight that as their ability to have networks or connections in this space, which then help the organization, which leads to partnerships and other pieces, but some people underline that. Yeah, internal, external stakeholders. Yeah, definitely. With when you have a membership organization, that makes a lot of sense, Peter, particularly given the context of the you know, Y and JCC model. Yeah, these are all great. And hopefully, you know, as you're thinking about evaluation in your organization, if you don't already have a system or product that you're really excited about, I think having these conversations is really important. One of the first things that we always want to do anytime we're doing this kind of process is start from the board members and the leader themselves and ask them, right? What are the criteria that you think are most important and ensuring that folks are tightly aligned?
So I want to spend some time on methodology, right? How does one gather comprehensive feedback on a full year, right? For a CEO or an executive director. So the first, I mean, I think we all can agree on the 360 feedback. It's really important to gain as many perspectives on a CEO's performance against metrics across the year. This can include a wide range of stakeholders, both internal and external to the organization. We highly recommend direct reports, so a sampling of staff, those that you're providing direct service to, external partners. Again, this is feedback. This is not evaluation, right? So we're just really looking at, how does a CEO's actions, impact the organization overall? Also, how does that CEO show up in across different stakeholder groups, across lines of difference, across lines of power? Want to make sure it's competency based, right? So as we said at the outset, we do run executive search. Whenever we run a search, it has to be grounded in competencies, right? When we're making a selection, it's grounded in competencies. So why not, right? Have the evaluation also be grounded in competencies, right? And they're very much going to be aligned to what's in the job description. Third is really being objective and equitable. I think what's really important is understanding that we are taking low inference notes in our conversations with folks. We're not editorializing. We're not leaving anything out. We're just taking comprehensive notes from folks. We're also making sure that there are at least 2 different entry points for folks to provide feedback, right? So that's in a formal form, right, that someone's filling out, providing quantitative and qualitative feedback, and also in one-on-one or small group conversation to understand a CEO's performance, right, against some specific metrics. It's really being forward focused. I said this earlier. So you gather all this feedback, right? Now, what do you do with it, right? That's really the most important part of this, is really taking all of this feedback, all of the inputs, and then how do you channel that into something that can be impactful and meaningful for everyone involved, right? The CEO, for there to be like true respect, given to this process, a CEO is not just going to want to hear how, what the results were, but okay, now what are we doing, right? What are the focus areas? Also really important for us to be asking questions around how the CEO would like to be supported by the board. A CEO, yes, we often see very high performing CEOs, doing amazing things, but they need support, and they need to have an opportunity to, raise their hand and say, I need support in X area, or I'm looking for this from my board. And that's a place where we find there to be like really deep and meaningful conversation between a CEO and their board. So the 360 feedback, it's a multi-pronged approach, as I shared, right? It's stakeholder interviews. Christina and I hold these with each individual board member, right? So it's one-on-one. We do with direct reports, either individually or in small group. And again, some additional stakeholders identified from the outset. There's a self-assessment. CEO should have ample time to complete, their self-assessment and really be able to understand that they also have an opportunity to speak, with someone on their assessment, right? Because we're not all just written processors, right? For me, I'm a verbal processor. Sometimes it's very helpful to chat it through, but the questions have to be consistent and they have to be, documented well, so we can provide a really comprehensive report. On the anonymous surveys, this is also helpful to make sure folks, know that their feedback is not being tied to any one individual quote or person.
And just one thing to underscore is that, the board is rating and evaluating the person. Other stakeholders are providing feedback, right? So similarly with any decision-making process, you want to be really clear about someone's role. So to Brett's point, we're very clear. Board members get, competency aligned survey, as the individual for their self-assessment that's very specific around here are the different competency areas. How are they doing? How are they doing on metrics, right? Looking at that, it's a much more evaluative step. But we do still want to gather that 360 feedback. And so from stakeholders, we're very clear, okay, let's get more holistic feedback on your experience as an employee and your experience as a leader, but we're clear that it's not a rating step. They're not giving them numbers. They're not, evaluating on specific competencies. So we do try to delineate a little bit of that difference as well, but still have the opportunity to get all that feedback for the board, because board members, we're not in the organization every day. We don't know what's happening necessarily on the same level as the staff.
Then see a question from Erin on how long we give to the 360 process. It depends, of course, but I would say, as long as you give folks a heads up and give them a timeline for, how long it's going to be open for, it's sending out the survey form for folks to complete by X date, but then also providing, multiple opportunities for those one-on-one conversations. I'd say as long as you give a 1 week heads up that this is coming, preview it, what's included, it can be wrapped in 2 weeks, right? It's really going to just be based on the context of your organization, trying to schedule it around all of the things, right, that may be happening. Timing is really important for this.
Great question about feedback for board members. So yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of whatever you do, it should be a thoughtful process and an organized process and look the same, right? So in terms of how soon you give feedback, what I think is really important is when someone gets in seat as a new leader, and it's hard to do this, right? But when someone gets in seat as a new leader, before that fiscal year begins, or school year begins if it's a school, or however you mark kind of beginning of time in your organization, there should be a sit-down conversation with, key board members, the board chair and or the head of your evaluation committee, if you have an evaluation committee. If you don't, usually your governance and executive committee. Oh, sorry. Yes, the question's allowed. Sorry. One of the questions was, what information should be shared with board members, and are 360 feedbacks the only tool that should be used for evaluations? Thank you, Jen, for speaking that. So, and then there was a question around when you start giving feedback. So at the beginning of the year, there should be a sense of like, okay, we're starting the clock. We're going to level set on what we're expecting to happen this year. Many organizations do twice a year. So they'll often do a mid-year and an end of year check-in. The mid-year is a little less formal, but it's still, a little less formal, but it's still an opportunity. Maybe they'll do a staff focus group, or maybe they'll do a culture and climate survey of staff and other folks in the organization, just to get an initial sense of how things are going. And board members, of course, should also be looking throughout the year on progress against goals and how things are going more broadly in the organization on all those factors we mentioned earlier. And then typically at the end of year review, that's when you do much more formal conversations, surveys, much more in-depth process as kind of an annual review. So question, what are the criteria or categories you use for feedback to ensure stakeholders don't evaluate? It's just more general, right? So we'll ask, for example, how are you feeling about the organization? How are they, it's just the questions are much more softball questions. Like, is it fulfilling its mission and vision? Do you feel you're accomplishing your goals? What's most important to you going forward? What are challenges you face this year? What are things that the leader could do to, what are opportunities for growth for the leader that can make next year even better? So it's a much more generalized questions versus for board members, where it's literally going down the competency criteria and asking them to evaluate. And then there's a question around, how do you recommend the board use the 360 in their feedback, as the perception from stakeholders might vary for board goals? Yes, it's always a comprehensive piece, right? The board's always going to have your lens, which is the goals and priorities you have for the leader. Staff sentiment can't supersede that, right? Like, you're going to have your goals and priorities. What it can do though is fill in some gaps and fill in a picture for you. Yeah. All right. And then there's a question around 360 review. I think I'm going to hold some of these questions, Joanna, so we can go forward, but then we'll pick them up in a moment. Okay, great.
So I think the next slide is going to go through. So I think one of the most important pieces is really like naming the divergence, right? Sometimes, right, there is not much divergence, but in many cases we've seen there is, right? So the CEO is rating themselves, higher or lower than the collective of the board. So typically, we try to look for where there's most variance. In this example, we have a 1 to 4 scale, 4 being exceeding expectations. So in this example here, right, we looked at 3 criteria, which is the competency areas of people leadership, academic leadership, organizational leadership. In the case of people, the CEO rating themselves, significantly higher, academic leadership higher as well, organizational leadership lower. It's just important to call these differences out. Of course, these are just the quantitative, right? So the conversation really has to be around the qualitative, right? Why is there this divergence? And this is going to be really helpful in the conversation amongst board members, but with the CEO as well. So we want to ask you this poll question. So in reflecting on this in your own experience, what do you find to be the most difficult when evaluating your leadership?
Yeah, I think it's probably not surprising, Brett, the action planning piece that we found too. Like you could do the evaluation, but one of the things that we really have tried to do with clients is that, okay, and then what, right? Like what are the recommendations going forward, and actually sitting with them and having them develop that plan, right? Of what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with this feedback, right? How do we communicate it to the person? What are the action steps we're going to ask them to take? How are we going to monitor if those action steps are actually making a difference, or seeing the change happen that we want to have happen? So that makes a lot of sense to me. And then customizing for your needs, I think, can happen too, because there are a lot of off-the-shelf tools, but it's hard to know, how do I adapt this to my context? So that all makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
So what tools do we find most helpful when we've done evaluations? There are a few things that we use, and I think one of them ties into one of these questions here, which is, do you do a review in the first 6 months? Do you do a review without goals? I think, I probably would wait to do a full review. I'd give someone a year, just because it takes a little time as a new person to get your sea legs and to figure out what you're doing. And you shouldn't do reviews without goals, right? Now, what I would say, what we have done is we've done sort of a pilot. So we've had some clients that came to us and said, okay, our bad. We didn't really set formal goals with the leader. We want to kind of see where we are today, like just get a baseline of how things are going now. And then we can really set goals for next year. And we say, great, that makes a lot of sense to me. So we've actually done this multiple times before, where we say, great, let's just come in. We're just going to do a quick just survey, right? We're not going to say like formal ratings on these goals, because you don't have goals that you've set aside, but at least just how are things going? Temperature check, how are folks feeling, right? Check in with the leader. The leader was comfortable with that. We're like, great. So we did conduct feedback sessions. We did talk to the board and the leader to get a sense of how things are going. And then from that, we said, hey, this is how things are going. And we asked in those questions too, what goals should we be measuring? We asked board members and the leader, what should we be looking at going forward? And got a nice set of their dashboard metrics as well as competencies that we use going forward. So I think you don't want to do a formal review necessarily without goals, but you can do, if it's understood by everyone, it's a baseline. We're just going to kind of see how things are going today and then set our goals going forward. I think that works. In terms of what goals you should have, right? Competency frameworks, you should have some way of measuring, and this should be for all levels in your organization. And we actually do this at Edgility. We come in and help people build competency frameworks, because it's not surprisingly, you do searches or you do compensation, which are the two primary things that we started doing initially. And both of those intersect with competencies, right? Because for a search, we need to know what are the core competencies someone has to have to be ready for the job. And similarly with compensation, if we're trying to put people into job families and levels, we need to know what are the competencies required at each of these levels for someone to be successful, and to know, are they low, medium, high on the experience or skill range, right? So it all goes back to competencies as far as we understand. So you should have a list of things that are just, this is what it means to be a really great leader at our organization, right? And again, organizational leadership, finances, mission and vision alignment, equity leadership, whatever those things are for you, right? You should have some categories. You also, as an organization, and this is really important, I cannot underscore this enough as a former board member and someone who works with boards every day, you need to have metrics and KPIs. You need to say, this is what success looks like for our organization this year. Because it's not fair to the leader otherwise. That's where we get to that mishmash that I was talking about earlier, where the leader says, I'm doing a great job. And the board says, we don't know if you're doing a great job, because no one ever sat down and said, what are our common agreement of our metrics? And not only metrics, but it's not 30 things of a list of like my 30 priorities. It's actually, what are those 5 to 7 things that are most important to us as an organization? And ideally, we have a dashboard. We're looking at those things every board meeting, right? We're going in depth on them quarterly, right? We're really saying, what are the things that are going to mean that we're successful as an organization? You've got to have those. It's not fair to a leader if you don't have those, or to you, and you're not going to be able to accomplish your goals. So that's really important too. And then finally, you have to have some way of reporting out to the person, to the board, first of all, on the findings of your evaluation process, and then to the individual, the leader, on the findings of your evaluation process. And then you have to have recommendations on what to do going forward. I think that question around, okay, then what do we do with it, right? None of us know what to do with it. That's really where you need to be able to say, okay, based on this, here's our plan for next year, and put that into place. And then you start the cycle again. I just want to give an example. There are many examples, but just an example, a quick snapshot from one of our reports that we've done, and I'm sure you all have done something similar. In this case, we administered a self-assessment. These are dummy numbers, by the way, because we weren't going to use real numbers for someone, but let's pretend that this is a real case. We distributed a self-assessment and then distributed a board assessment. These are the competencies that we asked each side to evaluate. Again, similar to the other ones we've talked about before, right? Mission, vision, equity, people leadership, organizational leadership, finance and ops, and relationship building. So we laid out these things. We asked the individual, how do you think you're doing in these areas? To Brett's point, it was a 4-point scale. So they evaluated themselves on 1 to 4. We asked the board the same question. And then we don't have it here. But the other thing is that from our surveys, in addition to asking the numbers question, we asked qualitative feedback from the board and the individual. We said basically, okay, explain, right? When you say mission, vision, alignment, you feel like you're a 4. What are the highlights? And then what are any growth areas or places that you're still working? And I don't have the details here because again, this is a dummy report, but we outlined those. I think the qualitative and quantitative combination we found is really helpful, however you do it. It's nice to have just a qualitative quick benchmark. Otherwise, our conversation can be a little mushy, right? So let's get down to brass tacks. Let's just say on 1 to 4, how are you feeling? How are we feeling, right? Let's get some numbers. But I also think it's important to have some qualitative data underneath it because it's like, oh, great, I'm a 3 on people leadership. I don't know why, right? And to be able to kind of talk about that, it also gives the individual on their self-assessment a chance to be really open about the things they're super proud about in an organized way, which we don't always get a chance to do as leaders, and also the things they're working on in an organized way. And to Brett's point, for someone that's an internal processor, they get to write it down. If they're a verbal processor, they can also talk with us about it. We put all that information together and then we, present it to the board. So I think this is however you do it. I think having a combination of qualitative and quantitative, and I've done that also as board members. We've always done, facilitated sessions with staff or families if it's a school or whatever it is, in addition to the actual ratings forms. I think that combination is really valuable. So I wanted to just give a case study. It's actually, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but we had an organization where we had placed the CEO. Everyone was feeling good, right? The CEO was feeling good about her job. The board was feeling good about her. When they first placed her, we talked about different things we could support them with: agility, compensation. I mentioned CEO evaluation. They said, yeah, that would be great. And then just didn't hear anything from them. I followed up over time. And then in the spring, they said, oh no, we didn't really do that evaluation process thing. And now we're trying to figure out what to do. So we said, that's okay. Let's get a baseline. So we came in and we set a baseline together. We talked with the individual herself and said, here are the leadership competencies that we actually used when you were hired. Did these still feel appropriate? She said, yes, those were great. We went to the board, they agreed. So we said, okay, we have a common set of competencies that we're going to be looking at in this process. Again, we didn't have any metrics or KPIs because they hadn't laid out goals or metrics, but we asked everyone, what are the metrics and goals we should be setting going forward? What are those things that are most important in running this organization? We also provided some ideas ourselves from work that we have done, the things that we've seen organizations prioritize previously and be successful. And so we outlining those competencies, we did distribute, feedback forms to stakeholders also, and just said, how are things going? How are you feeling? We had, I think, Brett, we had direct conversations with a couple of focus groups of staff, right? As well as direct reports. We spoke individually with direct reports. And then we spoke with board members, and we also distributed survey forms to board members and the leader, as well as a general survey to other staff members that had interacted with her more generally. And then this led to a formal evaluation report. So we put together, a full report of our findings. We presented it to the small subcommittee of the board. Again, I would highly recommend you have an evaluation committee. Maybe it's your governance committee or your executive committee that fills that gap. Maybe you have an ad hoc evaluation committee. However you do it, have some small group of individuals that's responsible for moving this work forward, on their own or working with someone like us or however it happens. One thing I would highly recommend too, this is the board's job. This is actually a really important thing for me to say to all of you who are leaders and all of you who are board members. Evaluating the leader is the board's job. It's not the leader's job. It's not the chief talent officer's job or the managing director of talent's job. It's the board's job. And too often in organizations, I also see that it gets complicated when the talent person is setting up the process to also evaluate their boss and gather feedback, or the person themselves is having to run their own evaluation process. Board members, this is your job, right? This is part of what we sign up for. And so make sure that you're driving the process and that the information is private to you, that you're taking all of the information from the report, you're deciding what you're going to do with it, you're meeting with the full board to have that discussion, and then you're meeting with the leader and presenting it to them. And don't let the lines get messy, because that actually causes a lot of issues, and it's just not best practice, and it's not the right thing to do, right? So it's a really important piece. But however your committee, your board committee gets together, have them synthesize findings, sit down with the full board in a closed session meeting, present those findings, let the whole board feel comfortable, ask questions, go back and forth, feel really good about it, and then have a conversation with your leader where you're presenting those findings and recommendations for next steps. That was like our formal content that we have today. So I'm actually going to shut down the screen share. I just on a webinar, so I'll just leave this. Leave our last slide up. We have QR code, but we don't have to close right away. We'd love to see what questions you all have for us. So please take yourself off mute if you want to chat, or put them in the chat or in the Q&A, but we'd love to hear. We gave you a lot of information. What are you looking to learn about? I'm going to start with a question Erin asked quite a while ago. Thank you for being patient, Erin, about best practices and who conducts stakeholder interviews. And I think, Brett, you gave some responses potentially to that as well. Best practice would be a board member, right? So when I was a board member, that's what I did. Or if not a board member, if you're having a third-party evaluator like us do it, them. It definitely should not be anyone internal to the organization. Definitely not. Let's see. How can an organization reach out to you? Oh, you can email me or Brett. I'm just C Greenberg, CGREENBERG at agilityconsulting.com. Brett is Brett Kunsch, BKUNSCH at agilityconsulting.com. Or if you can't remember that, just contact info@agilityconsulting.com. And Joanna, who's right here. Oh, see, Brett put in the chat. Thank you, Brett. You also can always contact info@ and someone will find you. But yes, we would love to talk about it. So question that Jen posed, or a comment. It's interesting that what to do going forward was the biggest struggle. We talked about the coaching piece, and her point is this is a place that managers can struggle with as well. I love that alignment, Jen, that like this, the board ED CEO relationship is a microcosm of our broader management relationships, right? The same thing that I just said for boards and CEO EDs completely applies to your organization, right? Everyone in your organization should have goals. You should have organizational metrics. They should know how their goals relate to those organizational metrics, KPIs. They should know what personal metrics and KPIs affect them and relate to their job performance. And as managers, it's our job to have that conversation and be as concrete as possible. I think it can be really hard for any of us in a management conversation where someone comes to us and says, "You're doing great." Why? And it's very general, just as you're not doing great. And it's very general, right? So I think having specific things that we've agreed to and looking at a holistic, comprehensive view on each other is really important to be able to give each other really good feedback. And I think having a 360 process can be great for all kinds of folks in your organization, right? Not just the CEO ED. So there are a lot of tools out there that do 360 reviews. I think they can be useful, but having that, however you do it, having that mindset and idea is really important. Other questions, things that folks would like to learn more about?
I'm looking through the chat to see if there was anything else from the top. I think we covered everything.
Okay. Great. Well, reach
Yeah.
out to us. Yeah, go ahead, Joanna, please.
I was just going to say, I'm seeing 2 questions now about the same thing, about the template of an example for our tool. We are going to be sending an example out with the recording in that follow-up email. So you will have access to that tool.
And we also did a blog post this week as well that's on our newsletter. And Joanna, do we want to tell people how they can sign up for our newsletter if they want?
Sure, I can drop a link. Hang on one second.
great, because there's an evaluation piece in there too. And just contact Brett and I too, even if you're, you don't want to necessarily work with us on a project, if you just have questions. I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about board, CEO, ED relationships and evaluations and support and talent. So always just reach out to us too. We're happy to just be a resource for you. All right. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your days. We appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
And thank you to our hosts, Christina and Brett. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, folks.